Welcome to the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival, one of the world's largest and oldest Jewish cultural arts events. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is Miryam Kabakov, and I am the Executive Director of Eshel, an organization that supports Orthodox LGBTQ individuals and their families. And I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with the filmmaker of Marry Me However, Rabbi Mordechai Vardi, which is premiering at this year's festival, Eshel community member Motti Salzberg, Professor Jessie Abouarab, and Rabbi Steve Greenberg. Thank you all for joining us. So I will ask each of you specific questions on your take of and relationship to this film. So let's start with Rabbi Vardi. Rabbi Mordechai Vardi is the rabbi of Kibbutz Rosh Tzurim and a director, scriptwriter, and instructor at Ma'aleh School of Television, Film, and the Arts in Jerusalem. He wrote the screenplay for the movie Halakeh, which was screened at the Jerusalem Film Festival in 2008 and broadcasted on Israeli television. Rabbi Vardi produced and directed the 2017 documentary titled The Field, and most recently, he produced and directed the documentary film Marry Me However. The film shares the stories of men and women pressured by familial expectations and religious duty to marry against their orientations. Some shared their secret with their partners, and some kept it hidden, and some lied even to themselves. After their divorces, they confront the conflicts they repressed. The film also follows the women who married and divorced their homosexual partners, as well as rabbis and psychologists, struggling to respond thoughtfully to the complex human realities they're witnessing. Rabbi Vardi, can you share with us the evolution of your interest in this story, and how have Israeli audiences responded to the film? And lastly, what you would like to accomplish with this film?
Okay, hello everybody. The first time I met this phenomenon of gay people marrying women was 20 years ago by my student in yeshiva in Ma'alot. And he married and divorced after 1 year. And he didn't share his girl with his attraction to men, and maybe he didn't even say to himself, because I cannot explain how he got to this decision to marry a woman without telling her and thinking it will be all right. After years, I met this issue again in another student of mine in Ma'aleh who learned was a student of screenwriting, a very religious boy. And I knew that he was married and with 2 children. And in the Facebook, I read that he's got out of the closet and left Jewish practicing. So I called him and I wanted to understand this phenomenon. What's going on here? And we talked. We had a very long conversation, and I started to realize, to understand how deeply they can deny uh, you know, their most basic feeling of life. That really he told, in this case, he told me that he told the girl that he is attracted to men, but he also thought that he was attracted to her. He was confused about he wanted very much to see her again. It was very pleasant to having dates of talking with her. They're not touching each other before marriage. And he thought it's okay. And I understood this, I thought that this have to come out. And I started my journey to understand this phenomenon that, you know, almost everyone who is very religious, and he starting to feel that he is attracted to men and not to women, the first thing is thinking about is denying it and saying, I'll get married and it will be okay. And many of the rabbis support this kind of thinking. And many of the girls also think that, you know, gays are in Tel Aviv, not in the yeshiva. In the yeshiva, you can't have gays. Okay, so, and many times rabbis say to these guys, listen, it's something you have to overcome. You know, it's forbidden to have relations between men, so you have to overcome this, like I have to overcome when I'm attracted to my neighbor's wife. It's the same. So you have to overcome and to marry and to have children and heteronormative family. And then I realized when I started making the film that my two girls also were dating with the yeshiva bochers who were gays, and I understand that it's a very broad phenomenon that have to come out. The most powerful thing I found in my journey is the suffering of the women who are married to these guys. Many times their life was, they couldn't get married again because of the trauma, and they really had the issues with the with this for years. So I think that it's not only it's really a bad solution to send them all to get married. And after the film got out, I got many phones of of you know, after we had an in the television, in the news about the film when it got out. 5 minutes after it was in the television, I got a telephone from a mother that said, "My daughter is getting married in 2 months to a gay boy, a religious boy. What can I do? Can you talk with her?" I said, "Okay, I can talk with her, but I'm not sure that she will talk to me." And she didn't. And I got phones from ultra-Orthodox uh, gay and lesbian, and I heard the big suffering of both sides. So I think it's a very, it is accepted in Israel as a very important film. And lately they invited me for um, a film that they made for teachers in the religious education. It opened the issue very highly. I remember first time um, I saw the film Trembling Before God, and I asked rabbis to come to Male and see together the film. And there is a big shock. I think it's something very similar that's happening now, but because now people are talking about it, but still, in many ways, this is the best solution that rabbi has in their package. What can they offer to the gays and to the lesbians? They can offer them a treatment and getting married. And in this film, I want to open their eyes. If you go into, I can also share that's not lately. I got a telephone from a psychologist that she had a patient that is going to marry a gay, and she consulted me. What can she say? Because this religious guy said that he never was attracted to any woman, but with her he felt differently. And this girl told the psychiatrist, "What you will tell me to do, I'll do. If you'll tell me to get married with this boy, I will. If you tell me not, I will not. I give you the I give you the mandate to tell me what to do. So she called me and to consult with me. She saw the film, and the girl saw the film, and the boy, they all saw the film, and it brought up this big question, because she very much wanted to marry him. She's not so young, and well, I think it's everybody see that this is very important to bring out this issue. Um, so that's for now.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Vardi. Can you just speak a little bit more to how widespread the influence so far is of this film in terms of the different communities, the micro communities in Israel, and the religious sects and factions, and how widespread has it been and received?
I think it's like people tell one another, "What, didn't you see this film yet?" So I heard from people that they say, "Well, I heard about the film, but I didn't see it yet." So I think almost everybody know about this film. It made a big waves, you know, especially in the religious communities.
Great, thank you. Okay, we will come back to you later, I think, our conversation. So the next speaker is Motti Salzberg, who is a clinical social worker in private practice who specializes in the treatment of sexual and other traumas. He formerly was a rabbi working in Jewish education with both adults and children. He has 4 children from his first marriage and currently lives with his partner in Maplewood, New Jersey. Motti, can you talk about your lived experience of this film and how what you saw here resonates for you? If you could tell us a little bit about your background and your story. And has watching this film taught you anything new about your own experience and yourself?
Um, so, you know, Ravardi's student could have been me. You know, he spoke about 2 students, but particularly the second student really was me, not could have been me, was me. I grew up in America in the Black Hat community, the equivalent of the Israeli Haredi community. And in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, when I was in a rabbinical college, I knew something was off about my attraction. I knew that, you know, I felt something towards men and not towards women. But as Ravardi said, it wasn't something I could articulate to myself, or certainly not envision, because within that framework, within that society, you get married, you have children. Um, I did, as I began to grapple with it, I did say to a rabbi I was particularly close with, I said, I'm struggling with something. I'm too ashamed to even mention it to you. Can you arrange for me to see a psychologist? And so he reached out to a psychologist also from the same Black Hat community, and arranged for me to meet with him. My parents did not know. Someone paid for this, you know, without my parents knowing. And I remember I went in, I think 1, 2, 3 sessions, and I literally could not get any words out. And honestly, in hindsight, it was more to myself than even, let alone to say it to someone else out loud. And finally, you know, the sessions were just chit chat, because on paper, I was, you know, quote unquote, one of the top boys in the yeshiva. I was pursuing a bachelor's degree as well. On paper, everything was great. And, you know, in terms of the type of dating, the shidduch style dating, which, you know, matches are suggested, and there is dating, but it's kind of intense marriage oriented dating without any physical touch, as Ravardi also mentioned. You know, I was a catch. And so finally, at the end of the 3rd session, I believe, the psychologist said, you know, clearly you can't say what you're coming here for. Can you write it down for me? Would that be easier? And I, to this day, I can see the office, I can see his desk. He handed me a Post-it note, a pad of Post-it notes. And I remember what I wrote down, which was what I genuinely understood at the time, that I'm drawn to depictions of men having sex. I don't think I'm gay. And I remember I wrote, I've never, and I underlined never 3 times, been attracted to any boy I know. And this was how I was conceptualizing it to myself. Um, and this psychologist took the piece of paper, looked at me, and said, this is a little bit out of my area of expertise. Let me consult with a colleague. I'll get back to you next week. And that was the end of the session. And that was probably one of the longest weeks of my life because I felt like my whole future was on the line. And when I came into the next session, his response to me was, so I spoke to my colleague, based on what you're describing here, it's fine, get married, you'll be okay. Which was exactly what I wanted to hear. And so I did. I dated and I, met my now ex-wife. We dated shidduch style. She is a beautiful, idealistic woman, and I presented myself as somebody who wanted to be a rabbi, wanted to go into Jewish education. And I did not allow myself to really contemplate what was actually going on with me. I had heard from the psychologist all I needed to hear. I never spoke about it again. I never talked about it to the rabbi. We just got married. We were married for 8.5 years. We have 4 children together. Our marriage was hell from day one, particularly for her. And it was a very peculiar kind of hell because to the outside, we were the perfect couple. We had, we were in Jewish education, we were community figures in a small Jewish community. We had, children quickly, as one is supposed to have in these communities, and behind closed doors, the emotional aspect of the relationship was fine, was more than fine. But the definitional aspect of the relationship, which marriage is a sexual relationship by definition, was a complete mess. And my ex particularly was in hell because she had no idea what was going on. She was a healthy, woman who wanted the whole package of a marriage. She was idealistic in terms of what kind of Jewish family she wanted to raise, but she was also very much, attracted to me and couldn't understand why this man who everything else was working for, this aspect, I just seemed so disinterested. And because of the community I was in, and because of, particularly it was just at the beginning of the internet, so access to information wasn't out there, I could not be honest with myself, let alone with her, about what was going on. And this went on for close to 8.5 years. When finally, as we had moved communities, and I think the trauma of being in a new place and having to rebuild myself, the world was opening up. I remember Governor McCreevy of New Jersey, that scandal where he too was outed, started to explode. And at that point, I did come out to this rabbi that I had spoken to years ago, not as gay, but as same-sex attracted, someone who wanted to stay married and go to therapy and, ultimately open up to my now ex. I think I was terrified of that part. And again, he, I can say well-meaning, but it's hard to say well-meaning when he caused so much pain. He went along with it. So he knew for 1.5 years before my ex knew. He was speaking to her, reassuring her that I was finally getting the help that I needed, but that I wasn't ready to talk about what the reason was. Until finally I did tell her, but again, I told her I wanted to stay married. I told her I had a problem I wanted to fix. And now what the problem is. It was she, a mother of 4 young children, who had the courage to come to me and say, no, I've suffered enough. Now that I know what it is, I know it's not going to change. I need to get out. And it took me, I would say, to speak to what Rabbi Vardi said about the level of denial in the community for individuals. It took me 1 year plus post-divorce, including doing what's known as reparative therapy, which is fortunately illegal in most states in New York and in Israel, although they're trying to repackage it as quickly as they can. It took 1.5 years post my divorce for me to finally accept that I was gay. And, I had actually had from my prior lifetime a connection to Rabbi Greenberg, and I reached out to him and said, hey, remember me? Because I had been, as part of an educational institution I was connected with, we had gone to I don't remember exactly what kind of program it was, of some kind of conference where Trembling Before God was being shown, which naturally I was very interested in. And so I reconnected Rabbi Greenberg, who connected me to my now community. Ultimately, this is before Eshel was founded, but very much became a part of this community. And I think that my journey is sadly typical. And I think that the further distance I get from it, and my children are grown now, my ex and our relationship has really evolved and grown. I would say we are friends now. But the more I move away from it, the more I understand what her experience was and how damaging, brutally damaging this perspective is, not just for the men. I went on my journey, I came out, I found the community, I found the life. And as Rav Vardi mentioned, for the women, the trauma is in many ways more significant because there is no community for them to land in. And they have this bind, many of the spouses in Rav Vardi's film ended up leaving religion. My ex-wife did not. She remains a wig-wearing member of the Black Hat community that she lives in. And it's funny because she watched the movie and we had a conversation recently about it. And I said to her, I said, I don't understand how you stay in this community that has hurt you so deeply and profoundly. And she said, which is both beautiful, but speaks to her strength of character. She said, listen, it's what I believe the truth is. I can't leave it. But how much pain did she go through? And I obviously need to take responsibility for what I did, how I did it, and how I hurt her. But there really is a much larger community issue that is still ongoing, as Rav Vardi said. Those phone calls are heartbreaking. It's 2021 with the internet, with the movie, with Eshel. It's still happening that women from communities that practice Shomer Negiah, that boys and girls don't touch each other before marriage, that are raised to look at marriage, particularly the woman, and this is a whole separate conversation, are raised to look at marriage as an act of service. And in those communities, it very much feels to me the Rabbanim, and unfortunately still professionals, are still encouraging, young men or women who know, and today probably it's much more difficult. I did not tell my ex-wife because I didn't tell myself before I was married. Today, it would be much harder with the internet and with everything that's out there to be able to have that level of denial for myself, but it's still going on. And listen, I do understand how devastating it is to let go of a path in life that you've been raised literally from birth to expect to have. But on whose back? And I think that the pain and confusion that it causes is beyond the parameters of what could be allowed. As a clinician today, I'm horrified by many things. That therapist that I described to you did so many things that were awful. So many things, from telling me to get married, not asking any follow-up questions. That's the thing I think about as a clinician today. Not even telling me, wow, that was really brave of you to say out loud. There were so many things wrong with that. But the idea that there is a clinical treatment, that the way to test the utility of the treatment and the success of the treatment is on the back of another person, is beyond the pale. And that's effectively what's happening when you're telling a young man who knows internally about his sexuality to do. I just want to wrap up with this. Part of the conversation my ex and I had recently, she's like, so what did you tell yourself? She said to me, what did you tell yourself about attraction to me? Like, how did you, we never had that conversation. She goes, like, how did you date me? You said all the right things. And my ex-wife is an objectively beautiful woman. And I said to her, I said, I know this is going to be hard for you to hear and probably believe. I genuinely didn't think about it. The container of halacha and the way the communities were in allowed me to literally walk up to the chuppah without ever contemplating what that lack of attraction would mean. I had eyes, I could tell she was beautiful, I knew what to say, But that kind of key glue, like I said, definitional glue in a marriage, I had no idea because I just didn't let myself go there. And think how damaging it is for a young woman who is feeling those things at her core fundamentally to be put in a situation where it's just not being reciprocated on the other end.
Thank you so much, Motti. Okay, we will come back to you as well. So our next speaker is Dr. Jessie Abouarab, who holds a PhD in international relations, majoring in foreign policy and security studies in the Middle East, specializing in women's and gender studies. Her interdisciplinary academic approach is legal normative, fostering critical thinking about security studies, refugee governance, and norm translation through participatory learning methods when probing the nature of questions, issues, materials, and problems under study. In addition, as a feminist Middle Eastern scholar and an enthusiastic activist, Dr. Abouarab's non-academic work includes grassroots advocacy and community organizing to increase the power, voice, and leadership of marginalized communities in advancing global justice. Dr. Abouarab teaches at Florida International University. So, coming from your research, I am curious to hear how you understand this film. What's striking to you? Can you talk about the concept of sexuality as an identity, and how does culture and this documentary portray that?
Thank you, Miryam, for the introduction. And thank you for including me in this very much needed conversation. I really appreciated this documentary and the visibility that it gave for those marginalized communities. As you know, the concept of knowledge and the silence is very important when people such as Mori was describing, and of course Vardi was showcasing through the documentary, that knowing themselves and what is identity and what is sexuality. Until today, it is an open-ended question, where you see couples being formed together, forged together, where sexual practices, performances were happening, but then again, you do not feel like you're there, right? Orientation is part of it. All these play a role. And when there's no talk, when there's no discourse, there's no knowledge, you see couples, people less empowered to seek strength, agency, and fall back to what social expectation and norms dictate from there. So I really appreciated, of course, also the inclusivity of women in the experience, such as Modi was talking about. This partner that usually in talks is silence. Both of them fell victim to these systems of oppression, right? Because end of the day, I relate to it, from that perspective, where a person's concept of identity is based on collectivism, right? That you are part of this community, and this community, if they do not open this space for them to talk about what is sexuality, what are these spaces of intimacies that are meaningful, and how can we navigate it in a viable way, keeping them included within this religious community, right? So I feel from the lack of conversation, right, the power of knowledge, it's kind of more used as a way, a discursive way of limiting people's ability to feel that they belong. There's something wrong with me, right? Which provide this space for methods and mechanism of enforcing, like you were talking about before, those therapeutic tools, or you just go with it and you will change. Or I recall somewhere in the documentary, like showcasing them pictures of naked women, right, and masturbating on them, and maybe your desires will go away, and all these stuff, which are intimate part of your life. And you see how, even though it's not talked about, but then again, silence is providing this kind of tool, a power, right, to regulate your intimate life and how you should live, and what is the concept of family, the nucleus, and the tools of sexuality, which strips away from you the experience of thoughts, desire, feelings, all that stuff is confused, convoluted into just the concept of reproduction, right? And what it is and what is not. Unfortunately, this happens in many communities, and it's the identity. When you talk about sexual identity, you're gonna bring the media, the family, the layers, the social, right, the religion, and how you are, perceived, and who do you think you are, and how do you need to behave, right? Mori, you're the perfect person on papers and all that stuff, but then inside you feel like you're leading this fake life, and you dump all these negative aspects on yourself, and feeling like you reject who you are, and you hide. And this concept of hiding and guilt, which many of the protagonists within your documentary showcase, they feel it's my fault that my partner went through that, and which is not true, right? Because you were also forced into that marriage, the thinking that this is how I need to do and I will change, right? The therapist that you had to go and hide and seek help indirectly, and feeling hesitant, but you should be, but you should not be, right? Which is something normal. Each person should have a space to talk and vent and whatnot. And this silence is the one that kind of create this burden on all individuals to feel that they just want to belong, because they're communal people, and they would love to connect with the society. So I see it as a tragedy on all parts, and nobody should take the blame for it. And yes, you had the agency to open up from the beginning, but then again, you too, like many others within the queer community, they feel pressured that this is not who I am. I'm going into it because I want to change, and this is how it is. So I need to live this lie, right? And all these stuff until, like you said, it's going to hit the fan and somebody's going to get hurt. And of course, this is what I appreciate about this documentary. Many people, when they talk about queerness, LGBT and whatnot, they focus on the male. Even religious scripts, they focus on the male. Women do not exist. Lesbians do not exist, because end of the day, it's a kind of, it's not good and bad, right? Certain spaces is good because they get to navigate it. It's not punishable by death or by prison or whatnot. But then again, the question here is, is it better to be talked about and seen as deviant, right? At least you acknowledge you're an entity, or you're just invisible and you don't have a voice, right? And that's the trauma and the dilemma that women go through. And within the society, like you said, you were able to be deviant, you were able to move on, you have the choice to belong or not. But these women feel trapped because they don't have a voice. Either they need to keep on working within underground and hidden spaces, or they have to find that voice, which I appreciate this documentary highlights. Okay, I'll stop there just to create space to talk.
Thank you so much. Okay. Next up is Rabbi Steve Greenberg. Rabbi Greenberg is an Orthodox ordained educator, writer, and speaker who has led the call for LGBTQ inclusion in the Orthodox world. He's the author of the award-winning book, Wrestling with God and Men, Homosexuality in the Jewish Tradition, for which he won the Koreit Jewish Book Award for Philosophy and Thought in 2005. Rabbi Greenberg is also a founder of the Jerusalem Open House, Jerusalem's first gay and lesbian community center, and currently a faculty member of the Hartman Institute of North America. He's the founding director of Eshel, an Orthodox LGBTQ community support, education, and advocacy organization. And he lives with his partner, Stephen Goldstein, and daughter, Amalia, in Boston. So, Steve, can you talk about the developments in the Orthodox community around gay marriage and some of your involvement with that?
Yeah, this is an incredibly powerful film. And I just want to begin by thanking Rabbi Vardi for the courage and the sensitivity and knowledge of how to do this well. It's not an easy task. I'm going to begin by kind of just sharing that what Motti said, and even in kind of like highlighting also Jessie's frame for like growing up feeling that you have something dangerous inside your gut, but you can't even name it. So that's what it felt like. I think growing up in the Midwest in Ohio, I didn't have any words, but I just knew that there was something fearful about what was inside of me that I needed to hide. You know, I mean, I kind of think like religion, I became observant at 15 because religion was a way to avoid the expectations of sexual expression that were everywhere in teenage life in America in the 70s. So becoming Shomer Negiah was like, whoa, I don't like, no one's going to judge me for not dating girls and engaging in that kind of, you know, that ritual discovery of sexuality. Of course, what that meant was that I sent myself off to Yeshiva University and then to Israel. And I discovered at the age of 20 that the repression broke through and I had to talk to somebody, but I couldn't speak to anybody in my yeshiva. I went to Yosef Sholem Elioshev in the Haredi community in Jerusalem. And I said, Master, I'm attracted to both men and women, which was what I thought when I was 20 years old. What should I do? And his answer was, my dear one, my friend, you have twice the power of love, use it carefully. So I was like thrilled with that answer. I thought, well, that's great, because I kind of understood that I was attracted to men, but I was probably attracted to women. Of course, I had no experience. And then I threw myself for the next 15 years into seeking to getting married, finishing up rabbinical school, thinking I'm going to have a great life, and feeling that even the words, and I think you mentioned this, there's something here in your thoughts as well, Jessie, is that to admit to the self, to admit myself that I was gay, would be to stand at the edge of a cliff where no future life was possible, because every future given to me, and those were futures of family and kids, those were all the good futures that were out there. Like, and the, you know, these were the futures not only that I was given by my culture, by my family, but these are the futures that I wanted. And I realized that the moment I even said to myself, I am gay, I would be standing at the edge of a cliff, because there'd be no future. And that is why this film is so profound, is that it's not only important for rabbis to stop encouraging people like Motti was encouraged to marry, but it's important for 15-year-olds to imagine that they can conceive of a life within familial and communal frames that is celebrated and is gay. And the absence of that life trajectory, the absence of the arc of expectation that a good life can be shaped, does a number of, it can end up in a number of spaces. The most common space, perhaps, in modern Orthodox environment is leaving, is saying, I'm done with this, I'm out of here. As you go to more, you know, right-wing Orthodox or religious trajectories, the possibility of living outside that space is nil. There is no sociality, no imagination, no. So what then is your option except to fantasize the possibility that you can make it happen by will, or to deny your feelings, or to simply move forward with an expectation, hoping that you can get by. And that's exactly quite what leads to the tragedies that have been articulated here. In the Orthodox community in America, I didn't want to do same-sex commitment ceremonies as I finally came out of the closet and got involved and wrote the book and got involved in Eshel and helped found the organization. And I didn't want to do same-sex marriages because I felt like maybe the community wasn't ready for it. And finally, I felt that it was irresponsible that to not offer a trajectory of a legitimated religious life together and commitment, I couldn't do. So in 2011, I finally did a same-sex commitment ceremony. And a month later, 100 Orthodox rabbis, leading the pack was my teachers at Yeshiva University, wrote a letter denouncing the possibility of a same-sex commitment ceremony that was Orthodox. But since then, things have begun to kind of shift, in part because of the 2015 Supreme Court decision, which I think bolstered the possibility, even in the Orthodox community, that this was becoming legitimate. There was reaction, but there was also a kind of support for those who were feeling this was, a move to take. And then recently, I would say, over the past couple of years, a number of young Orthodox rabbis, and not so young Orthodox rabbis for that matter, began to decide that time had come to do this. And so there's now, I think, among Orthodox rabbis, about 8 Orthodox rabbis who are willing to do commitment ceremonies. I want to, claim that the commitment ceremonies are not identical to the same kind of service that is done for heterosexual couples. It doesn't include kiddushin, and it just includes frames of commitment that are lifelong and are fit within the language of the halakha, Jewish law. And finally, I just want to finish by saying that the film, I think, is already generating a response in this regard, and I think it will in the future as well. Rabbi Benny Lau, who was a Rav Shkunati and the head of cultural and educational efforts in Israel, and a very well-known figure, saw the movie and immediately claimed that it was time to find a way to support gay people to find committed lifelong love and relationship within a context of a celebratory ceremony. He said that we can no longer demand that people ideally stay alone for the whole of their lives, because lo tov heyot adam levado, it's not good for the human being to remain alone. And he sees that as obligatory upon the community to make it clear that we have to kind of begin to construct a space for the lifelong love of people who find themselves in this circumstance. And it, I think, is beginning to be heard more often by the moderate or more liberal Orthodox leadership, but increasingly in subtle ways, even further to the right. And so, yeah, for now, I think that's enough. But my incredible gratitude to Rabbi Morty for helping push through this awareness into the community.
Great, thank you. So Rabbi Vardi, I'm going to come back to you with a question. Is there ever a case where you think it's the right thing to do for someone to stay in a marriage where one person is LGBTQ, whether it involves the children or their place in their community? Can you speak to that?
Really, I tried to find for my film LGBTs that are still married to in the heterosexual, but I got some telephones from people that say, I am the example that it can be. But when I ask them to speak out and to participate in the film, and that I can ask them questions, they didn't want to get in the film. So I really cannot say if there is some example that it can work. Some said that it can be, but I don't know how. So I can't give any speaking about this, because I never met someone who is married and say, I am married and I'm happy. And I could ask his wife if she's happy also, and what's going on with them. So this is a thing that people are talking about, but I never had any example of it. So
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we get asked that question a lot on our warm line, whether people should stay in their marriages, and there's a lot at stake when they leave their marriages. There's also a tremendous amount at stake when they stay. So on that note, I'm going to segue to Motti. Motti, what would you have said to your earlier self, knowing what you know now about the trajectory of your life?
I would have said breathe. Honestly, and I so much appreciate, Jesse, your perspective here, kind of the bird's eye perspective, because I think that self-knowledge piece was so key. I'm very aware that I have, children as a result of getting married to a woman, and I don't know, and certainly, in the late 90s, I couldn't necessarily see the way the world had changed. But I would have said, breathe, get to know yourself. I would have said, think about what you're doing. Because I think, when you were speaking, Jesse, talking about not taking guilt, it's very hard not to, because it's hard once you are aware to kind of forgive yourself for being not aware, even though you're correct. There were so many communal pieces. I would have just said, think, pause. Don't say you're not getting married. Say you're not dating. Like let yourself know yourself. And then the last piece, and this is really, Ravardi, why I'm so appreciative for you. Even I know in the conversations I've had with my ex and she watched the film. Think about the other person. Whatever grief, anger, hurt I would have dealt with in terms of not having that life, but what about the other person? Because I genuinely, the worst byproduct of that inability to think would be that. So I just wish I could have said to myself, think about what you're doing, have a conversation, open the conversation. Ravardi, I too have yet to meet the LGBT person married to a member of the opposite sex, who, when you scratch at it a little bit and ask them questions, because a lot of times Miryam punts those phone calls on the warm line to me. And I've yet to meet a relationship who works for, except for one person I know, not Jewish, Mormon, um, very openly out as what he calls same-sex attracted, had published a book before he met and dated his wife. So he was already known in that community as the gay guy. And they had a dialogue that began, she read a whole memoir before she even met him, and went in with her eyes open. I can't speak to what goes on behind closed doors in their marriage, but it's an interesting perspective for me, because I think that that's something I would have said to my younger self. If you're going to do it from a space of self-knowledge and from a space of talking to all the parties involved, primarily the woman you're going to marry.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I mean, it's interesting, like in the Orthodox world and Jewish tradition, certainly, the relationship between you and someone else is incredibly important. But there's also this sense of the relationship to you and the community who you are supposed to sort of help build and uphold. And so I think that when somebody gets married, we say that you should build a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael, a faithful and strong house in Israel, to be a pillar. So it's like, here I am, the individual, and I have my feelings and this relationship that I have to cultivate, nurture, or not. And then I have the entire Jewish people waiting for me to help build another pillar to hold it up. So there's an incredible amount of pressure from the communal aspect. So I think that is seriously at play when people decide to get married, and it's very easy to ignore the self in that. And I think the key is to find the right guides, the right rabbinic leaders to help you pivot. Like you said, Motti, ask yourself, what do I need? Listen to my voice. So Jessie, I'm going to swing back to you. How would you say this film relates to the micro communities in Lebanon and in Islam and in the different areas of your work that you're familiar with?
For
And what
sure.
are some of the parallels and differences?
For sure. And again, like Modi was saying, the issue of self-censorship, right? Where people are forced to hide, and then without acknowledging themselves, or maybe acknowledging themselves, they say that, well, hey, I am in a functioning heterosexual relationship and I can make it happen and I lead this private life that nobody needs to know. And maybe that's why Mordechai Vardi, that they do not want to step out. They're comfortable in that hidden scene. And again, this brings back the concept of privilege, right? because a person's identity is not just the sexuality, but the class, the race, all these different tools that help them navigate or might kind of oppress them, right? So in the sense of Lebanon, again, you do have micro communities. Again, Lebanon has 18 different sects that, you know, each group has their own personal status law and all these stuff. But then again, because it's such a rich community, people are able to have privilege. Some don't, some not. It depends if they are gender conforming or not. Again, all these stuff play a role about how a person leads a life. You do have many people that are knowledgeable about their sexuality. They are open about it between each other on the law, and a lot of gay men end up making connection with lesbians and saying, well, hey, let's go in front of the community, marry each other, and have children of our own while leading our private lives. So again, you see all these different agency and networking, informal networks that help them navigate these scenes. But then again, Lebanon is highly sectarian when it comes to laws and regulations. Homosexuality is not something that is acknowledged. Um, uh, Again, lesbian women are more invisible than men, so it's mostly targeted to men. It wasn't until 2012 or 13 that they stopped the test to test men when they go to the military. It's called the egg test. It's a very discriminatory technique where they use an egg to see if somebody is fit to serve and whatnot. So coming from wars and all that stuff, you have a community, a culture that is highly toxically connected to what is masculinity, right? And within this society, the concept of manhood is highly connected to this patriarchal power structure. So if a woman is a lesbian or not, it doesn't matter, because as long as she get married, she's fine, right? Her job is to procreate, but the toll gets on the men, right? Because as soon as they're discovered as being homosexual, they lose their power. They're feminized, right? They lose their manhood. It's like castration, right? In the Torah, when they say, like, you do whatever you want, but you cannot take out your manhood, your sense of being, that concept of that identity. And so this space of this toxic masculinity, adding years of war, the concept of manhood with militarization and being aggressive and gaining power, that's how it is within those micro community. I feel with the connection with the economic, social status, gender conforming or whatnot, different groups of micro LGBT community experience their life differently. Some live in hiding, others they cannot have that privilege to be able to hide. I really connected with that sentence. That lady was like, I just want to die. I just want to die. Because you cannot tell a person, okay, either you're LGBT or you're religious. See, your identity is beyond that. You can be religious and have different sexual desire. Why do I need to make that choice? Right? And unfortunately, that silence pushes people outside of these spaces, and they feel like dejected. Many of these adolescents commit suicide, or either bullied or whatnot, because they cannot imagine themselves without this community which they were raised, right? We're social animals in the end. We need that connection with our parents, with our community. Everything we've lived with, we studied, we think that we are, is thrown in the garbage just because of that concept of there's no space for homosexual people. Okay, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jessie. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Greenberg one last question, and then I'm going to allow the panelists to ask each other questions in our final round. So Steve, do you see gay marriage ever being accepted within non-liberal Orthodox communities? And if so, how will that evolution take place?
Yeah. So, Orthodoxy is going through, a challenging fracture that is happening in many different spaces in the American scene right now. And so there's not one Orthodoxy, that's for sure true. And there's some communities that it will be extremely difficult to imagine any such avenues. Uh, and so the only thing that I think could happen, and I think is already happening, is that Orthodox, even right-wing Orthodox rabbis are no longer believing that they can ignore this, or they don't want the challenging question that happened in the film, and I think it's happened in that when we work in Eshel, we speak with rabbis, even belligerent and kind of insistent rabbis, and I've said it many times. So Rabbi, would you want your daughter to marry a guy who's struggling with his sexuality? And the answer, of course, is no. So, well, then why won't you offer him a possibility to live a life to where he's not pressured to do that? So they have no answer to this question. What it is clear is that they no longer are in denial about the problem. What they are in denial about is the challenge of what is required halachically and culturally for them to do. They're in at least some space where I think empathy has grown. I think we've done a study at Eshel of Orthodox rabbis, and it turns out that some 80 to 90% of them are empathetic to the situation of single people who are gay. The moment you raise the specter of couples and families, it becomes much more difficult for them. And so my guess is that modern Orthodox rabbis will be moving much more quickly to find ways to do what Rabbi Lau is now suggesting, which is support commitment ceremonies, because people shouldn't really be alone, and find ways to incorporate such couples and families into Orthodox environments. That will be happening, and I think we see it already moving. In the more Haredi community, I think there'll be encouragement for people to leave the community if they cannot, commit to the life frames either of lifelong celibacy or making yourself function in a marriage even against your will.
Thank you. So now each of you get to ask somebody else on this panel a question. Does anybody have something that they'd like to ask? Jessie.
See, thank you for giving me that space. I just wanted to know and understand and build that connection. See, most Arab communities, they do believe, and especially in Islam and whatnot, that this concept of homosexuality is something that it does not exist within their society. It's this Western thought, right? The West bringing these ideas to corrupt the minds and ruin the families and destroy societies, right? So I just want to know if that exists within the conservative, Orthodox Jewish communities or not, or is it something that is more differently seen? Especially that you lived in New York, these spaces. I just want to know because, of course, the West usually here in the States, like individuality is something important. That is a drive or whatnot. But we do not see that within, different communities, especially when it comes to, that is based on religion or, that is based on social order structure where collectivism is something appreciated and whatnot. So I just want to see, like, did you have that kind of, I don't know, tension in between these two?
I can say yes, we have it because we have a party in Israel going to the Knesset now in the elections called the party, his name is Noam, and they say that the gays and the homosexuality is the enemy of the family, is destroying the family structure. And they had a caricatura, where there is a big ship and Netanyahu is holding the wheel, and there is a homosexual with the colors who is making a hole in the ship that we all will drown. So it's like, you know, like an anti-Semitic caricature. So yes, in Israel we have this kind of theory that the LGBT is the enemy of the family that is going to destroy the destruction of the society. And I tried to, in the film, I tried to show that these people want family more than everything else. They just want family. This is the big desire to have family, and they went all the way and got married against their feelings and did any, but they couldn't do it. So they have had to have alternative families and thinking about how they can have children and the table of Shabbat. And we have this conversation, of course.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else have a question or a comment to Jessie's question?
I'll just add quickly that Rav Moshe Feinstein in 1970, right after the beginning of the Stonewall kind of focus on gay rights, basically wrote that homosexuality doesn't exist. It's a demonic desire to destroy. There's no real human desire as such, and while it wasn't largely supported by the whole of the Orthodox community, there were many for many years who said there's no such thing as a homosexual, because the moment that homosexuality is a non-pathological minority expression of just human sexuality, it is the way God made some portion of the human community. The moment it's left-handedness, or it's green eyes, or it's colorblindness, the moment it's just a small portrayal of what it means to be human, then everything will change. And so the default is it doesn't exist. It is a perversion of what is the singular reality of human beings, which is heteronormativity. And I think that's the space that still some right-wing rabbis are articulating, but it's changing. I'll tell you the expression of change that's really most profound is that the Chief Rabbi of England came out with a document last year, right? That was a guide for the well-being of LGBTQ pupils in Orthodox schools. The excitement here is that the admission that there is such a thing as LGBT plus pupils in schools is huge, because it means that the reality is there and we need to find a way to respond to it. I'd like to ask, if I could, Jessie and Rabbi Vardi a question, and maybe Motti as well can kind of chime in. The other option is to marry and have stuff on the side, which I believe in patriarchal cultures is exactly what normatively would happen, is that everyone had to marry, because if you didn't marry, you just weren't, as you say, you disappeared. Non-marriage is a way to remain a child. And so you marry, you don't have a happy married life, but you get to produce children and you get to pretend. But B, if you're male, you find your sexual satisfaction elsewhere, and that normative frame, in some spaces, is preferred to the prospects of coming out.
Oh, definitely. I don't know. What do you? Okay, so definitely, like I said, a person's identity is also impacted by their gender. So a woman at the age of 30 or 40 is not married. There's a really negative connotation to that, right? Which make like spinster or something, like basically broken, right? And especially in the Middle Eastern community, where a child grow in their parents' home until they get married. So it does not stop at the age of 18 where you're like, okay, goodbye. No, they remain in their family home until they get married. And sometimes even when they get married, they live with their parents, or their parents live with them. So like I said, your concept of yourself is not just anymore who is Jessie or is Mori or who is Steve. It's more about I'm a daughter of this family, I'm this line and whatnot, that is based on patriarchal norms. So many LGBT people, they do want family because that's their concept. That's how they were born. That's how they grew. They like it. They enjoy it. Who doesn't, right? But then again, I have that little penchant here, that part of my identity that I'm struggling with. So here you make a choice, since we all have agency. Should I keep it in the dark? Am I able to keep it in the dark, live it on the side, and keep living this lie for the sake of this bigger identity of mine, or not? And this is where I feel, men are more privileged than women, because they have the agency, right? Because the patriarchal, they're the head of the family, they have the agency to tell or not, right? Where a woman is expected to obey, be forced into it, or not. It's not out of choice as much. So and this is where you see a lot of, like, basically marital rape issue that comes out, or arranged marriages, and there you go with the concept of age, right? Because early child marriage and all that stuff that come into play. See, and I think until, like I stated, until 2012-13, marital rape was not acknowledged in Lebanon. As long as there's a husband and wife, that it cannot happen, and stuff like that. I hope I answered your question, Steve.
Okay, thank
I
you.
can say that I had conversations with Haredi that called me when he heard about the film. He said that he is nobody to talk with, but he can talk with me because he knew I made the film. And he told me that he found partners in the mikvehs. He was a chosid, and he found the partners in the mikveh. And I asked him, how can you know who? He said, you can see in the eyes and in the shaking hands, you know that he's with you. And he said before he got married, after he was engaged, he wanted to suicide because he didn't know how to make it. And then with the guy in the mikveh, he told him, don't worry, flesh touches the flesh, it will happen, then you will have children. And he said, and he shared with me that his wife died from cancer. And all her life, she didn't know why she's having so much suffering and hell with the relations with him. And it was very interesting that he was consulting with me because he was considering having marriage again. He said it's very comfortable for me to have a wife with me. So maybe I'll do it again. And this time I'll just say that sex is not so interesting for me. And after we had many conversations, he said, it's very new for me that we have to also consider the women's feeling. I didn't think that we didn't talk about it. We'd also talking about our problem, and we didn't think about what the other side is thinking. So this life, separated life with his wife, that he was always trying not to touch her, and when she said she loves him, he felt very bad about it, and finding partners in the mikveh. He
Rabbi
said that he could make children because he used pictures of Rabbanim. It helped him to have a relation, intimate relation with his wife while thinking about picture of Rabbanim.
Wow. Rabbi Vardi, I'm hearing this like part 2 or sequel, that a film that just focuses on the experience of the straight spouse, because I feel that if you highlight that experience, that this whole conversation will change. It's not about forcing the person who, who has same-sex attraction into a straight marriage. It's about considering who is that person on the other end of that relationship.
I second that to the nth degree. And I just I want to be hesitant in sharing my own experiences around that piece of on the side. And in doing so, highlight how damaging it is. I feel comfortable saying that I was one of those men. And everything that, Jessie and Vardi are talking about in theory, certainly the gender construct is so huge there, Jessie, that I was able to do it. And for my ex-wife, that's not something she could do as a woman. But I also, part of why I'm being so silent is because the impact and the pain that that has caused, not just to my ex-wife, but to my children, is unfathomable and is still unfurling. And I know both from personal experience and from my professional clinical experience that there are whole networks, communities of men who find each other to hook up while being married. And just the range of what that does emotionally. STIs, something I think about a lot. Had I been born 5 years earlier, I very likely could have infected my wife and possibly children with HIV at a time that was a death sentence. There are so many layers here. And if you want to make that sequel Vardi and you find the women who are willing to go on camera or even anonymously, it's such an important layer to speak about.
Does anybody else have any questions for anyone else here? Okay. So I think we will bring this to a close. I want to thank you all so much for sharing. I think this was a wonderful conversation. I certainly learned here. And I want to especially thank you, Rabbi Mordechai Vardi, producer and director of Marry Me However, Eshel community member Motti Salzberg, Dr. Jessie Abouarab, and Rabbi Steve Greenberg for joining us. Once again, thank you to all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years, and to Florida International University. And thank you, our audience, for participating in the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.